This video will contain spoilers to Shin Megami Tensei V. It also serves as a partial follow-up to my first video covering SMT5, so if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts regarding this game, check that out as well. Those ones are spoiler-free, too. Power. The ability to stand above all others with complete control. Desired by most of humanity since time immemorial. There are many facets to the concept of power. The path to obtain it, the sacrifices that may be made, and the choices to make once it is obtained. Such a troubling concept power can be for humans, yet commonly not considered for gods. Within many religions and mythos, gods stand at the apex and hold absolute power. These gods often lack the human faults seen with those who hold power, such as corruption, favoritism, and selfishness, doing what is required of them to uphold order and provide guidance for their lesser counterparts, animals and humans alike. But, in spite of their generally perceived flawless nature, gods do have their times of trouble. And this begs the question, with complete power providing such a daunting responsibility, if even the gods who stand above humanity have troubles, who can be counted upon? Within the journey of Shin Megami Tensei V, many concepts are examined through the use of its theme. Concepts such as morality and knowledge are explored. But before getting into these concepts, we must clear up a few definitions to ensure complete understanding of what the theme of SMT5 is and how it is handled. To begin, we must look at theme itself. What is in a theme, and how does it influence the story being told? Theme is the overall message of a story, what the player takes away from their experience playing through a story. The theme oftentimes is not directly spelled out, but interlaced throughout the time spent during the story's progression. It works as the groundwork for a story. The theme is not a singular concept as within any story. Many different themes can be discerned. For example, one can view the central theme of Moby Dick to be that of man versus nature, opposing a force of nature with ferocity, facing off against the whale rather than looking at the situation with other viewpoints such as compassion or respect. However, it can also be looked at as a tale of fate. Many different aspects laid through the story point towards fate and its consequences, the inability to fight it. The theme is an aspect of the story that guides it. Each element of a story plays to the theme to some degree. The characters, the overarching story itself, and with video games, the visual aspects such as landscapes, and even less noticeable parts such as how gameplay operates. A good example of this could be seen in Bloodborne, with one of its central themes being a desperate fight for your life. This is shown within the plot itself, but also with how the gameplay is oriented. Constant dodges and small windows of time to recover if you find yourself at a disadvantage. Moving on, I'd like to briefly look at the concepts of law and chaos in Shin Megami Tensei. The alignment system has been a mainstay of the franchise, and is sometimes misunderstood. Law and chaos are not composite concepts akin to good and evil, but rather forces to represent the choices and morals of possibility. The two exist as opposites, with law appealing to order and falling in line with the natural order of the world. Representations of law within the series generally wish for authority to be seen and felt, with chaos being the opposite. Chaos works with freedom and chance being the driving force. With all of that covered, now we can delve into the theme of Shin Megami Tensei V, and all of the moving pieces that work together to make it happen. To start, we need to define our theme for Shin Megami Tensei V. During the story, one concept is brought up time and time again, this being the concept of power. Power in the highest sense of the word, the ability to stand above all life as the true god of the world. This being ultimately what the Nahobino comes to represent, and what many others covet. With this concept of power, the theme breaks itself down and looks at different aspects of power, such as the road to obtaining this power, the moral complications of power itself, and other equally complex matters. Throughout the runtime of the game, these questions are examined through different perspectives and situations. Characters will share their viewpoints and motivations, each of which contribute to the concept of power and what it stands for. In order of events within the story, the first aspect of the theme that can be examined is the path to power. In its truest form, the path to power is represented through the visual layout of the game, specifically through its many landscapes. As the Nahobino grows in power through his journey, so too do the landscapes that he traverses. paralleling the growth from insignificant human to the godlike being that he is at the end of the game. The location starts small scale, beginning with the familiar surroundings of Joeen High School and ending with the Empyrean and a realm beyond heaven and earth. The primary backdrop for the game, Dot, has roots within the Kabbalah. The word itself means knowledge, which ties to the ever-present concept of knowledge within Shin Megami Tensei V. More on that later. But moreover, in this belief system, Dot, which is one of the Sephiroth, contains the Tree of Life. The Tree of Life being another relevant location within the story, and one that shows up frequently. Dot is tied to the aspect of the soul that connects with memory and the power of meaning, the ability to know. The bosses of the game also represent the path to power, as each of them lust for the power of the Nahobino, as well as being figures within mythology that play tremendous roles. Examples being found within characters such as Surt, a being in Norse mythology who holds a fiery sword and appears only at the end of times to enact Ragnarok. Metatron, who is heralded as the mightiest angel of all and is described as the lesser Yahweh, and Arioch, who appears in the Book of Genesis, fighting in a battle between the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. Outside of these bosses also come the leaders of Bethel, who also vie for the Nahobino's power and must be defeated in order to progress the story. These figures tie into later concepts, so we'll look a bit closer at them later and how they influence the themes of SMT5. On the path to godhood, the bonds that the protagonist finds himself forming also come undone dependent on which path you choose. Much like those in the real world, those who forge a path to power, it is difficult to know who is your ally and who is your foe. Especially echoed by the Bethel leader Abdiel. Abdiel being a complex figure within the story who I'll also look at later on. In this context, it is clear that from the outset, she views the Nahobino as an affront to God himself. Despite this, she enlists his help in hopes that he will set his goal on the same path as hers. The path to godhood can also be seen coming to fruition not just within the story told at the ending, but within the final dungeon of the game. The Temple of Eternity, a former place of holiness, has become overrun by demons since God's death. The journey through this infested temple leads higher up, as a metaphor for the climb to the heavens, as well as a literal representation as the game leads the player higher and higher. The issue of humanity runs deep within the story of Shin Megami Tensei V, and the series as a whole, beginning the game as a human being who goes day to day with his life, and ending as the one true God above all else. A lot of complex issues arise from this. An internal question that the theme examines is how does one weigh the issues of the few versus the issues of the many. Throughout the story, the events that occur grow in scale alongside the protagonist. One of the first landmark events is the high school troubles of Sahori Itsukishima, the unfortunate victim of bullying. The students at the school muttering about how sad it is that she's being treated that way, with no real interest in doing anything about it. This comes to a climax as the border between the Netherworld and the pseudo-Tokyo comes crashing together, with the demon Lamu taking advantage of her weakened state. The human ordeal of confronting bullying and dealing with the fallout is represented through small dialogue within the school, as well as a rooftop meeting with Tao. She laments on how important it is to remember the human problems too, in spite of the state of the world. This conversation, alongside the events that unfold, encapsulate the issues presented with the overarching theme of power. As someone who has the power to stand on top, it is important to reflect on the issues of both sides. The more intimate, small-scale issues from the humans, as well as the grand-scale issues of contending with demons and gods. Philosophically, this argument is important as it echoes themes found in the real world once again. Those who find themselves in high positions of power often forget the minor troubles that the average people face, and focus on bigger issues such as holding their power and dealing with other countries. This issue is ever present in modern culture, with world leaders facing vague threats of all-out nuclear war and treading carefully on how to communicate with other superpowers, leaving the common citizen to wonder how to solve their lesser issues. As the Nahobino, it is important to weigh these issues carefully, as well as examine both perspectives. Being the fusion of human and demon, you are essentially a blank slate, the ordinary human boy who knew nothing of holy war, demons, and God. The proto-fiend Algami, a robotic replica of a former god, who like the protagonist has slim knowledge of the world they are faced with. Together, it is upon the fusion of the two, the Nahobino, to stand firm and consider these lofty issues on the path to godhood. Morality and power, a complicated dynamic. Corruption, unethical behavior, and self-fulfillment are all common behaviors of those who hold power. However, holding power does not necessitate these, and in fact can provide a higher version of the self, a better version who acknowledges these complicated issues and combats them. Once again, like the concept of humanity, Shin Megami Tensei is no stranger to the concept of morality. The alignment system can even be seen as a vague reflection of morality, which places importance on freedom and order. Both have their moral positives and negatives. 5 is no different, as it approaches the moral dilemma of the concept of power and what one can do with it. As the player approaches the end of the story, the concepts of law and chaos make themselves known through their representatives within the story. The angel Abdiel represents law, as she values the order of the previous god. Order is absolute, and a singular ruler must take the power to rule the world and cleanse the thought of possibility. On the opposite spectrum, we have the Bethel Japan leader, Koshimizu, who represents chaos. Koshimizu proposes that the rule of the myriad gods must return, allowing for free choice and distributing sovereignty amongst different rulers to allow them their own rule. Weighing both options against the background of morals makes the proposals from the two figures difficult. With the suggested route from Abdiel, free will would cease to exist. All that happens would be preordained by the one true God, and non-believers would have to pay the price. God's rule must be absolute and unwavering. In regard to morality, this holds both positive and negative repercussions. The positive is that humanity would have a single guiding force, who would be expected to know what is the best for it, whereas the consequence is the lack of free will entirely. On the opposite side, with Koshimizu's proposed recreation of a world governed by many, the positives can be seen within the free choice to live how one wants, to prey upon their own deity, and feel the positive or negative consequence that follows. With this in mind, the concept of a world governed by many can lead to absolute war between opposing religions. Infighting among gods may also occur as a result. From a moral standpoint, generally, freedom would be considered the more fair of the two options. Humanity deserves the right to choose what they want and live for themselves regardless of the consequence. But, if this is at the cost of countless lives being potentially lost, there is the argument to be made that absolute rule can be beneficial with both lives being preserved and morally, as though freedom may be lost, humanity is able to move forward without fear of the retribution of opposing forces. As the Nahobino, you are given these options to choose from, as well as the option to ignore both factions and recreate the world in the vision of another character within the story. This being Yakumo, the only human to have influence over the end decision. Yakumo believes that both sides are just a joke, and that the only power that should govern over humanity is itself. Anything that occurs as a result can only be blamed on humanity itself, with no concern to a higher power being needed. Regardless of which choice is made, there is the moral question that stems from each of them. These add to the overarching theme of power, as ultimately, the decision lies in the hands of the player, giving the game a degree of anxiety and weight as the end approaches. Stepping away from the Nahobino himself, the concept of morality is presented at the very beginning of the game. The exposition given on how the world of SMT5 came to be harkens to real-world ideology and myth. In the beginning, it is stated that many gods fought for the throne, but one eventually took hold. When this god did so, he separated the divine knowledge from all other gods. This turned them from his equals into lesser beings, simply called demons. These demons were forced to turn their back on God, and eventually fought among themselves. With the knowledge removed, God tucked it away in the Garden of Eden, where it was safe until Lucifer tempted humanity to consume it. This turned humans into beings closer to gods, and caused them to be cast out of paradise. This decision by God is an excellent example of how power can corrupt even the highest life form possible, as it is questionable to strip any equal that stood with you the chance to seize the throne. Even if the belief is that your path is the true one and only holds good for the world, it can be seen as quite unethical to do such a thing. Which is why eventually, God fell and the throne was once again open. A brief moment before continuing, but the concept of knowledge within the context of Shin Megami Tensei V is another excellent example of the way this game handles esoteric concepts found within the real world. The notion of knowledge is vague within the game, though it finds its roots in the real world as being the very defining factor that allows humans to function. Without knowledge in the esoteric sense, humanity would not have consciousness or know the distinction of good and evil. The knowledge aspect being unique to humanity allows for the plot to set up the concept of the Noyah, whose title in Japanese means original god, as well as further the complicated moral issues presented. Additionally, the lore within SMT5 connects to real-world mythos, with the former throne holders being mentioned to be Baal and Ra, both of whom play roles in side quests, which push the narrative in a broader sense, but also have prolific roles in the real world. Baal being a god worshipped widely in canon faith until being denounced in the Judeo-Christian belief, being turned from a flourishing figure of harvest to a demon, with some texts claiming him to be Beelzebub. Ra, also a creation god, with the Egyptian myth being one of the oldest known religious faiths in the real world. Looking at the former god through another lens can present a different case in terms of morality. Tying to the ideals presented by Abdiel and the law root of the game, God was intending on protecting humanity to the best of his ability. Even if there are obvious faults and objections to the path taken, there is good that derived from it as well. A prime example is represented through the Shekinah glory, the barrier which protects Tokyo and other parts of the world as a failsafe in case the world begins to fall apart. The barrier begins to fade as the story continues, adding to the ambiguity of God's fate, but also standing as a reminder that even dubious figures can make good decisions or have good intentions. The Shekinah glory is a term that is not directly found in the Bible. However, it is found in other branches of faith, such as Jewish texts, Islamic faith, and even Gnosticism. The term refers to God's presence, and ties to the Holy Spirit. The term being used to represent the remnant of Tokyo that persists can be seen as God's presence, as it was his goal, even were he to perish, to keep humanity safe. This term can also be loosely tied to the protagonist, as Shekinah glory in its original context is used to refer to God, as God's presence was considered to be too powerful for mortals to handle. This is comparable to the birth of the Noyah, as it is the first time a being of that power has come to exist since the centuries past when God stripped all others of their knowledge. And now we arrive at our final question posed within the theme of power. When faced with ultimate power, who is worthy of holding it? With endless possibility in sight, one must sit upon the throne and rule. Who is not only worthy, but also knowledgeable enough to set a course that will provide the best results? The lore the game sets up provides an interesting look at this answer, as well as the overall story. Many characters fall in line with representing their real-life counterparts, which tells their position within the story, as well as how they approach these complicated matters. The Noyah, our protagonist, symbolizes the core of this concept. In ancient Japanese myth, the Naobi no Kami arose after Izanagi, one of the creator gods, cleansed himself of impurity. The impurities created from Izanagi produced the Magatsuhi no Kami, who were corrupt and powerful beings. Answering the call to cleanse the world of these imposing figures, the Naobi no Kami was born. Paralleling this is Shin Megami Tensei V, with the world falling to corruption and no clear solution in sight. The Noyah was born to combat the end of the world. Abdiel and Koshimizu, as mentioned before, are the representatives for the law and chaos perspectives the Shin Megami Tensei franchise is best known for. Each of their proposed ideas on how the world should proceed encapsulates the problem of power and how to proceed with it, as well as displaying traits that tie to their real-world origins. Abdiel lives up to the title of Servant of God, as she remains dedicated to God's original plan on how the world must be ran. Within Judeo-Christian texts, Abdiel lives up to the title of Servant of God, as she remains dedicated to God's original plan on how the world must be ran. Within Judeo-Christian texts, Abdiel is marked as the angel who stood in defiance against Lucifer's revolt, proving dedication to the Lord. This influences the character who becomes so corrupt over diligence that she even goes as far as rebelling against God's will in order to uphold it. On the opposing side, there is Koshimizu, who reveals himself to truly be the Japanese god, Tsukuyomi. In Shinto belief, Tsukuyomi is the god of the moon, and a complex figure within the historical texts. Tsukuyomi was among the gods that were born from Izanagi's cleansing, and would remain in a favored position until one fateful day. During an encounter with another god, Tsukuyomi became outraged by how the god was conducting himself. So much so that he killed them, which led to him falling out of grace with his fellow gods. This being extremely similar to Koshimizu alienating himself from the Bethel group by protesting Abdiel's wishes. Among these two, the other prominent figures standing among them have all known power to some degree. Zeus, Odin, Khonsu, and Vasuki are all extremely prominent figures within their given lore. Each of them have their own beliefs on what should be done, with them taking charge and trying to reclaim their knowledge. All of these contrasting ideals on what should be done cause a sense of high tension and unease as the story carries along, having to deal with the inner question as someone who holds the power to change the world. What to do with it? Alluded to within the plot is that the creation of the Nahobino can be attributed to Lucifer, as he is the one who killed God and returned the world to a state of possibility where the fallen gods can reclaim their knowledge. Lucifer also provides an excellent examination at the end of the game with his conversation with the protagonist. During their final battle, he explains that in defeating him, the mandala system will come to an end. This mandala system is the cause and effect of ultimate power. One rises to the top of the food chain, sits upon the throne comfortably for a duration of time until one rises up with enough power to strike the current ruler down. This cycle is a reflection of a real-world political ideology that can be seen in many different parts of the world. The mandala system in SMT5 is symbolic to the core question of who the rightful ruler should be. The Nahobino being the only one with enough willpower and true compatibility to reach Lucifer and end the cycle once and for all. Not just this, but the Nahobino represents both the ideals of man and God. No matter what choice is made, ultimately, it will have consequences. Whatever choice the player makes, they must live with the fallout. With the endings of 5, there are multiple routes that may be proceeded down, each having their unique set of positive and negative effects on the world at large. As the Nahobino, you stand at the apex of existence itself after defeating Lucifer and ending the mandala system's proliferation. None can oppose you, so make sure that final choice matters. As we come to the end of this examination, I'd like to reiterate that the use of power as a leading concept allows for Shin Megami Tensei V to explore the questions and inner conflicts that it does. Through the perilous journey of growing from ordinary human being to becoming the one true God, the theme of power is ever present, leading to inner turmoil and philosophical thought on what is true or false, right or wrong. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Like always, thank you to everyone who has made it this far in the video. Your support means the world to me, and inspires me to keep moving forward and creating content. Hopefully this video made you appreciate the latest in the Shin Megami Tensei series. Or maybe it was just entertaining to listen to and pass the time. Regardless, if you have any feedback, let me know. Leave a like, comment, and if you'd like to see any more deep examinations like this one, or something entirely different, let me know. Thank you.